Hey guys, music review Mary Sue here, Besant, and today I'm listening to the 15th studio album from Californian metal band Megadeth, Dystopia. I think it's important that we start with the lyrical themes of this album, which I personally think are great. However, it will divide audiences as it's politically influenced. It generally speaks of an individualistic and corporate greed in the world and paints a dystopian future being built by a culture of selfishness instead of helping others. It also speaks of how history will look back on Western civilization, bearing in mind that one day Western empires will fall, mentioning terms such as tyrannicide, bearing in mind that history shall be written by the winners. It kind of has this vibe where it's like, take responsibility for issues in the world and don't just play along and blame it on culture. It genuinely has some wise and profound moments in its themes, despite this just being a sort of fun metal album. The themes of the sort of profundity come through, particularly for me, on the opening track, the title track, the song Post-American World, and Lying in State, which I think are some of the stronger tracks on this album. Some of the weaker tracks on this album, I think that they are the weaker tracks because of the way they are lyrically. Bullet in the Brain, which I feel is completely out of place in this album, and The Emperor, which I feel it holds up the themes, but it's a little bit too blatant and in your face. Foreign Policy as well, that's a little bit too blatant too. But there's not a lot of subtlety in this album lyrically. Now, I don't listen to a lot of metal nowadays, like a lot of metal. I listen to more metal than most people would. But in my opinion, I think this is actually one of the better Megadeth and one of the better heavy metal stroke thrash metal records in recent years. Just to clarify, I define metal and thrash metal as its own beast here, rather than, you know, speaking about it as part of the thriving metalcore industry that's going on at the moment. I think metal itself has become this kind of snobby and exclusive industry where only a handful of bands are even given the chance to be heard by listeners. So it's important to me, I think, that the dominating bands in the industry continue to keep it fresh, continue to have an important message to say, and I feel like this generally has really good instrumentation and songwriting throughout the album, as well as all those factors, and it's certainly better than their last record, which I think had, well, certainly mixed reviews amongst people that I know. Instrumentally, as I say, this album is kind of what you were expecting from the band. I suppose I wasn't expecting a more polished production style throughout. There's some great guitar tones on there, some very skillful playing, just what you would expect from a Megadeth album. Maybe the production value is a little bit higher than you would expect, which is a little bit more modern sounding is what I should probably say that. I think personally, and I know a lot of people will agree, guitar solos, there's something that went out of the window when grunge knocked metal off its sort of glamour phase. That being said, this album, it kind of works. There's quite a few solos in here, and it kind of gives you the history of who these guys are, and it's playing into their slightly older, more mature fan base who maybe would say, oh, I wish they would just play stuff like their old stuff, or I wish they would just play their old stuff. It kind of plays into that hand, as well as having some sort of fresh takes in this album. Personally, my favourite solo in this album is the bridge of the title track, where it's this huge instrumental switch up, and I just think that's a very enjoyable moment in the album. There's still some small details I didn't like instrumentally, just very small details, like there's these keys on the end of the third track which I wasn't a big fan of, sort of I suppose it was sort of some sort of cello sound on a key. I don't know. I just didn't really think it fitted the core sound of the band, which I think the core sound of this band is and always will be bass, two guitars, and drums and vocals. That being said, I did like it when they went out of the box a little bit with the bells on Conquer or Die. Ultimately, I enjoyed this album. But a band on their 15th album with so many ups and downs, I think that they've kind of become a parody of themselves, much like other metal bands. And I think Dave Mustang's voice has very much aged, none more than on the track Fatal Illusion, which I think made it sound like it was a Anvil meets Ailstorm, and I really didn't like that track, and I think it's the only vocal performance on this album that actually let this album down. But ultimately, this album gave us 45 minutes of heavily enjoyable guitar music, and at the end of the day, that's exactly what we wanted from a Megadeth album. Well, it's exactly what I wanted from a Megadeth album. I don't know about you. For what it is, I'm going to give this album an 8, but by sort of contextual and current standards, by which I mean cultural standards, what music is now, I'm going to have to give it a 6.5, and I probably think that might rise over time with more listens. Thank you so much for watching today, guys. I'm listening to one new album every working day of the year, and you know my thoughts. If that sounds like something that would interest you, please feel free to subscribe. Let me know your thoughts of this album in the comments section below, and we can have a little chat. Thanks very much for watching, guys. See you Monday.